as Trump is finally implementing a lot of his promised tariffs, many of them focused on China, just across the board tariffs. Smoot-Hawley tariffs have been tried in the past. This time around, Trump is saying that the impact will be manufacturing will come home. And this seems to be a convincing narrative. I've seen many people, even on my social media feed, saying this. You are the vice president of sales at Atlantic Vision, a company that has manufacturing done in Shenzhen, China. Are you, Sebastian, planning on bringing any manufacturing home onshore?
It's a great question, and it's something that we do actually do get asked a lot. And the simple reality is that we have, in the 25 years this company has existed, we've tried manufacturing in places other than overseas in Shenzhen and Shanghai. And the reality is that the very specific thing that we do has really kind of, as an industrial process, been perfected by the folks over there. And there simply is no place on the planet that can produce the quality connectivity in the volumes that are required onshore. And to onshore what it is that we do overseas would be so cost prohibitive that there's no chance of that ever happening. It simply isn't a reality. And the simple reality is, as you increase the price that I need to charge my customers as a function of tariffs, domestic producers of the same product are going to increase their products even more. So the high volume mass production of connectorized fiber products for data center and broadband is always going to rely on components that are produced overseas in China. And that's simply the reality. And so there's very little chance that we could onshore what it is we do and remain in business. So no, it's simply a reality for us that we're going to make the products where we make them, and that's not going to change.
That's interesting, the economics behind it. We don't see a lot of people talking about the products that are made domestically also increasing prices, because if competitors overseas are being tariffs and they have to raise prices to cover those incurred costs, obviously competitors in the United States are going to raise prices just enough because that's now market rate. That's what they can charge if that's what their competitors are charging. Are you worried that there's going to be some kind of marketing scheme of like made in the USA being pushed as, okay, you should buy our product instead, even though it's only, marginally cheaper?
That sort of nativism is always going to be used as a marketing tool. I've seen it happen live where people say, hey, buy something made in the United States. And there are some products where that doesn't make sense. There are some things that doesn't make sense to import because they're large, they're heavy, they make more sense to be produced domestically. But for a product like what I make, jumpers, patch cords, fiber optic connectorized, pre-connectorized fiber optic products, there's no such advantage to making it here. There's no structural advantage to making it here in the United States. If it's cheaper to make overseas, you can make it better overseas, you can make it faster and in much larger volumes overseas. Structurally speaking, there's not really much of an argument to make it here. There are products that I compete with my domestic competitors that we compete with. They do final assembly of here in the United States, terminals and drop cables for broadband. For the BEAD project, they're expanding factory capacity. Large competitors of ours like Corning and CommScope are looking to make products domestically in the United States to satisfy the demands of the BEAD project. But that's only a small little bit of fiber optics generally. And the reality is that those products are going to be way, way more expensive when they're made here, more expensive than they need to be. And that's exactly really when you think about how a tariff works. I mean, a tariff works by making the imported product more expensive so the domestic producer can charge more money. So to deny the inflationary effect of a tariff is really kind of misunderstands what a tariff is in the first place. So in terms of how that is something that we can or cannot compete with, obviously I can't sell to BEAD projects. I mean, BEAD funded projects, I'm locked out of that. And it's interesting that we got locked out of that by way of a pretty intensive lobbying effort by our domestic competitors to get the NTIA's request for waivers for our products locked out of the BEAD. So when the final BEAD rules came down last year, NTIA had actually requested waivers for drop cables and fiber optic terminals, the last mile of a broadband project. They actually requested waivers for those, knowing that producing those things domestically is going to make them much more expensive and in much shorter supply. So the NTIA actually requested waivers, and when the final rules came down, those waivers were rejected. So we thought we would be BEAD eligible, and because the NTIA had actually requested waivers to make our broadband products able to work for BEAD, and at the last second, they decided, no, we're not going to allow those waivers. So the NTIA requested waivers were denied, which means, overseas manufacturers like myself, I'm locked out of BEAD. And I think that's a big part of what makes BEAD a difficult project to roll out and why it's probably not going all that well, is you're required to buy very expensive domestic production for your last mile fiber connectorized products to actually roll the fiber out. You got to buy something that is way more expensive. So it makes taking the subsidization available from the government less effective. If you have to spend a whole lot of money on a more expensive domestic product, if the prices of what you got to buy are going up, then the subsidization doesn't really actually make a whole lot of sense. And it's also important to bear in mind that, at least in fiber optics, the world that I'm in, sure, the glass, the little 8 micron little piece of glass that's in the fiber cable, it might be drawn domestically here by companies like Corning. The polyethylene in the jacketing, the PVC that goes in the jacket, the fiber connector itself, those products are still manufactured overseas. So companies like Corning that we compete with on a daily basis, they're still importing raw materials from overseas. So the tariffs on those materials are making their cost of production go up. So I know I just rambled a lot for the last minute and a half, but the reality is that all the tariffs are going to do is just make everything more expensive in this business. It makes it harder for people to roll out projects, whether it's data center or whether it's broadband. It makes it more expensive to buy the raw materials you need to actually make them happen. And the cost of production for those domestic producers, their cost of production is going to go up. So everybody's costs are going way, way up. And it's just simply the reality of the business. Does that mean we can't compete? No, actually, I think it means you're going to need more of companies like us to offset how expensive everything is getting in this space. So I don't see this as a imminent threat to our business. I do see it as something that's going to be challenging for our customers to have to handle.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people say that the determinative factor of a company deciding to go overseas is, there's cheaper labor, right? But this seems like something that's extraordinarily technical. You're not just paying people, the lowest possible wage in the country. You're making the consideration, where do we find people with the technical expertise
Yeah.
to create these fiber optic cables? Is there another country you could go to besides China where the labor force is there to even produce these? I've seen a lot of, key actors in the garment industry say if these tariffs go into effect, we're moving from China to Bangladesh to India, somewhere in Southeast Asia where it's cheaper. Is there an equivalent like that for Atlantic Vision for fiber optic cables?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and we do receive solicitations and occasionally negotiate with producers of these sorts of projects who produce things in the Philippines and Vietnam. It is possible that you could try to move the production of what we do to another country. There are other countries that do make connectorized fiber optic products. In the volume that we produce, probably not. It would be difficult to move that high volume. I mean, we're doing millions of these connections every week, so there's that high volume of production to be able to move that to another country would be difficult. The thing that's important to bear in mind, at least with our specialized product, I'm sure if we're talking about something that's basically a fungible commodity, tires and wheels for cars and gaskets and refrigerators and washing machines and fasteners and shoes. Sure, moving from China to the Philippines, moving from the Philippines to Mexico, moving from Mexico to Bangladesh. Yes, moving your production around to dodge a specifically focused tariff probably does make sense. For what we do, it doesn't make sense. I mean, the reality is that the technical expertise, and not to get too far into the inside baseball, but when you think about a piece of fiber optic cable, this little 2 millimeter jacket, inside of here, there's a piece of glass that is only 8 microns in diameter. So the average human hair is about 140 microns. So it's 8 times thinner than a human hair. So a tiny little piece of fiber in there needs to be polished. And so when you cleave the fiber and polish it, it's a very boring job. Nobody wants to do this. It's not a fun job. So you're looking at this thing through a lens, and you're literally using a fiber optic polisher to polish the end face of that piece of glass. So the reason we're able to have this video conversation on opposite sides of the planet is that all of this fiber optic cabling around the world is passing photons of light through it at nearly the speed of light, and you need to have all of those photons getting where they're going. So you need the where the rubber meets the road, kind of like the contact patch on a race car. The contact patch for us is that polish job on the end of the end face of that fiber in this connector. The factories that do the best job of polishing that in the world are in Shenzhen. That's where they are. That's the reality. It's kind of like, you might have seen that video a couple weeks ago. Somebody did, kind of jokingly talking about, when the president said, "Well, why are we importing lumber from Canada anyway?" And somebody said, "Well, because that's where the trees are." Well, for us, the trees are located in Shenzhen. So that's where the best fiber optic polishers in the world are. The people that can do millions of these connections every week and do to sit down at 7 a.m. on a Monday and have the same quality polish job happen at 4 o'clock on a Friday is really hard to do. And believe me, we've tried other countries and we've tried in other places. It's really hard to do that. So the factories that we use to produce what we produce have a very specialized expertise that you can't just pick that up and move it to Bangladesh or to Guatemala or to anywhere else in the world. We can't just make this suddenly start happening in South Korea, even though right now it's happening in China. You can't just load that expertise onto a boat. That expertise resides inside of the factories and the people that have been spending the last 25, 30 years learning how to do this and industrializing that process and doing it really effectively. We can't just say, "Oh, we're going to make those in Moscow now." It's not going to work. You can't.
Yeah. Now we get to talk about the fun stuff. Is it true? Okay, I found this out about a year ago that these cables run through the bottom of the ocean. Is that true?
Yeah, the reason you're able to, FaceTime with your grandma when she's in Tokyo, the reason you're able to, talk to somebody and have an immediate conversation with somebody in South Africa when you're in Seattle is thanks to a web of fiber cables strung across the planet. So if you look at a map of where these things are, they literally are spidering around the planet, cables that are carrying optical signal all over the planet. So we've come a long way from the telegraph and from Marconi's radio in Cape Cod. We've come a long way, and to have video conversation in the mass traffic going around the planet, the reason why you can trade stocks on the Japanese stock market in real time, all of this happens thanks to fiber. So yes, the internet really is, poor Ted Stevens got lampooned for saying the internet's a series of tubes, but the internet's a series of tubes. It's a bunch of tubes of glass that are 8 microns in diameter, strung about the planet, connecting computers together. That's all. When people hear the cloud, what is the cloud? The cloud is just computing power you're renting from somebody else, and you're accessing that computing power thanks to fiber. So all the data centers that are getting built, they're getting connected with fiber. All of the, when you're doing disaster recovery in London for your bank in New York, that overflow capacity is happening thanks to fiber cables that are strung in between those two places. So the product that we make is that last mile. It's connecting a server, a computer, a transceiver in a data center somewhere here in the United States. You need to connect that to that cable that's running across the ocean. So how do you put those two things together? And you're connecting a computer through if you think of it like plumbing, you're connecting, the water line from your house to the water main, bigger fiber cables that are aggregating signal, and they all go to one building in 60 Hudson Street in New York City, where all those cables go across over to London. How do you make those connections happen? The routing of those pathways, if you visualize it, it is like a spider. It's like the capillaries in your body, and so we are a capillary, and if you think of those transatlantic cables as being like your arteries running through your body, we provide that last mile capillary, so you can connect that computer, that server, that data bank, that wherever you're connecting to. The electronics in your data center need to connect to those cables running across the planet, and that's what this is. So that's what we make.
So your base, right, is the headquarters of Atlantic Vision based in the United States?
Yeah, we're here in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts.
So a lot of your consumers or customers are around the world that you're selling these cables to. Is that true? Is this a company
It's
that
true.
kind of
Yeah.
brings global commerce to the United States?
We are a manufacturer that manufactures and sells to other distributors. So they're the companies. So our customers are usually distributors who sell to contractors that go into data centers and do the actual scunge work of setting up racks of servers and connectorizing them. Those contractors go in and they buy our products. So our customers we manufacture for them, and they go to those contractors and provide them this product. So yeah, our product does make its way probably into just about every data center in the world.
It's incredible. What does it look like if you could paint the picture when they're laying these cables? Is it like a giant ship with a spool of
Oh yeah,
wire?
so those Transocean cables are literally on a big reel, and they get reeled off of the back of a big old boat. Tyco, you remember the Dennis Kozlowski? You remember Tyco back when the .com bubble burst? One of the companies that burst was Tyco, and they that was their business. I remember actually I used to work in Baltimore. For the WorldCom office there in Baltimore, we would see that Tyco ship with a big reel of cable on it. We docked there where today they dock cruise ships. But yeah, so those cables are literally strung about the planet, and so if you look, I can email you like a cross plane view of what those cables are. But you have both electrical signal to power the repeaters, the amplifiers. So in that piece of glass, it's photons traveling down the glass. Every once in a while, a photon does bump into a molecule inside of the glass, that glass tube. And you over time, you lose signal. The signal degrades. About every 80, 90 kilometers, you've got to regenerate that signal. So you receive the signal, amplify it, regenerate it. So those cables are actually, they're pretty complicated. And it's actually pretty cool when you think about how we're powering and sending photons downstream on a piece of glass around the planet, and that's how we communicate. So we don't make that product. So that bulk fiber, that high fiber count bulk fiber product, that's made by companies like Corning, OFS, Prysmian. So the cables with thousands of fibers in them that are sold in big bulk reels to companies that do that kind of transocean work. That's not our business, but we kind of pick it up where those guys drop off at a building like 60 Hudson in New York City, where that Transocean cable goes, and that fiber signal gets distributed to different places around the world. And then that's my business is once it leaves the transatlantic or just around the country, the long haul fiber, we're the last mile, if you will. So the stuff that I make is mostly last mile fiber that is getting from somebody's computer server, something in a data center that's electronic that needs to connect, that capillary that needs to get back to the artery is what we make. So when you think about it, we are all connected by a piece of glass somewhere. And even with your iPhone, I mean, this is only wireless between here and the local cell phone tower. If you were to look out your window and go find the cell phone tower where AT&T or Verizon is broadcasting radio signal to you, there would be a piece of fiber going up to the radio on that tower. So you're only wireless about 100 yards. How far are you ever from a cell phone tower anymore in this country? When was the last time you didn't have any signal at all? It's not very often. So there are towers everywhere that are connecting all of our mobile devices together. And guess what? Every one of those has a piece of fiber on it, because the fiber is the only way you can aggregate enough bandwidth to be able to do that. And wait until we have a Google car driving everywhere, and there's only more of that coming.
Now, when you pay the tariff, Atlantic Vision, or whoever is purchasing what you've created in the factory in Shenzhen, when they pay the tariff to import the product, is that going to be, I mean, sometimes it's paid by the shipping company, but where will the American consumer find this price increase? Will it be internet providers? Will that be who is paying this tariff and who will then go on to increase prices?
Yeah.
What's your assessment of that, if you have one?
Probably the most recent, like, throw a shoe at the TV moment I remember having in the last few weeks thinking about this topic there was somebody from the White House talking about how, well, but when we charge tariffs to these exporters, I'm like, well, that's really not how that works. Okay, so yeah, so when we produce a product overseas, we're going to pay a tariff on the cost of production. So it's the cost of goods sold at the point of departure. So the tariff that we pay is based on what it costs me to produce this in Shenzhen. It's not based on the cost of sale here in the United States. So it's not like it does somewhat get hidden to the consumer. You don't really realize it. But yeah, so we pay customs, we pay duties on that inbound product based on the cost of goods produced at the point of departure. So we do incur a cost, and we do pass that on to our customers who are data center operators, telecom companies, fiber to the home operators. That cost does get passed on to them, which means their costs of doing their operational costs are going up, which means they need to charge more for that internet connection. So you can get to So all of your connectivity to Amazon and Netflix is ultimately going over a piece of fiber that somebody is now paying more for. So they need to charge you more operationally. So yes, I do have to charge more. It's not as much as you might think, but because again, it's against the cost of goods sold. So it's not going to put us out of business. I'm sure the current thinking is, well, we're going to get those importers and we're just going to knock them out and get them and just put them out of business with these tariffs. And it's kind of not how that works. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is we'll still keep producing the product, but it's going to make our competitors charge more. We're going to charge more. All of these connectivity products are going to get more expensive. And the consumer ultimately is the person who pays. At the end of the day, a tariff is a tax on your own population. If you live in a country where people are importing products, like we are in the United States, let's not make any bones about it. That's a tax on your consumers. So it is something that ultimately will be felt by the consumer. Now, do I have any illusions that the cost of a tariff on a jumper cable that we produce is a significant? We're a microcosm of the economy. We're a small piece of this equation. There's no doubt, but ultimately, when you extend that across everything else that we import from overseas, this is something that consumers are going to feel. There's no two ways about it. So this is something that ultimately does function as a tax on consumers.
Thank you, Sebastian Sassi, so much for breaking this down.
Yeah, hope that was helpful.
Appreciate you coming on.